Europe versus China. A trade war is brewing. Hold on to your hats, folks, because things are about to get real interesting in the world of international trade. The stakes have never been higher, and the drama is unfolding right before our eyes. The European Union, that bastion of diplomacy and consensus building, has seemingly declared economic war on China. This move has sent shockwaves through the global markets. Okay, maybe not officially, but they've slapped some hefty tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. And let me tell you, Beijing is not happy about it. The response from China has been swift and fierce. This isn't just some petty squabble over import duties. It's a full-blown economic showdown with far-reaching consequences. We're talking about two economic titans, each with their own strengths and vulnerabilities, going toe-to-toe in a battle for global dominance. The implications for global trade are enormous. The stakes are high, the rhetoric is heating up, and the rest of the world is watching nervously from the sidelines. Every move is being scrutinized. So, buckle up, grab your popcorn, and get ready for a wild ride as we delve into the messy, complicated, and frankly, hilarious world of the EU-China trade war. It's a spectacle you won't want to miss. Electric vehicles. The shocking truth about EU tariffs. Now, let's talk about these tariffs, shall we? The EU claims they're necessary to protect European car manufacturers from unfair competition from their Chinese counterparts. They argue that China is subsidizing its electric vehicle industry, giving them an unfair advantage in the global market. China, of course, denies these allegations, crying foul and accusing the EU of protectionism. They say these tariffs are nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to stifle competition and protect European jobs. So, who's right? Well, as with most things in life, the truth is probably somewhere in between. But one thing's for sure, these tariffs are going to have a real impact on the electric vehicle market, both in Europe and beyond. China fights back. WTO complaint and a trade war heats up. Remember that WTO we mentioned earlier? The World Trade Organization? Well, China's gone and filed a formal complaint against the EU over these tariffs. They're basically taking their case to the International Court of Trade, hoping to get the tariffs overturned. This is a pretty big deal. It shows that China isn't messing around. They're not just going to sit back and let the EU dictate the terms of trade. They're willing to fight back, and they're willing to do it on the international stage. The EU, for its part, is putting on a brave face, insisting that they're in the right, and that they're confident the WTO will rule in their favor. But behind closed doors, you can bet they're sweating bullets. A full-blown trade war with China is the last thing they need right now. Spain plays both sides. Can they stay neutral in this trade war? And now, for a little intrigue, let's talk about Spain. You see, Spain's in a bit of a pickle. On the one hand, they're a member of the EU, so they're bound by the bloc's trade policies, including these pesky tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. But on the other hand, Spain has been actively courting Chinese investment in recent years. They've been rolling out the red carpet for Chinese companies, offering them all sorts of incentives to invest in the Spanish economy. So, what's a country to do? Well, Spain's trying to walk a tightrope, maintaining good relations with both the EU and China. They're hoping to avoid taking sides in this trade war, but that's going to be easier said than done. Section 5. Global economy braces for impact. Who will win this trade spat? This trade spat between the EU and China isn't just a European or an Asian problem, it's a global problem. The global economy is so interconnected these days that a trade war between two of the world's largest economies is bound to have ripple effects around the globe. Businesses are already feeling the pinch. Supply chains are being disrupted, prices are rising, and consumers are starting to feel the squeeze. And if this trade war escalates, things are only going to get worse. So who's going to win this trade war? Honestly, nobody wins in a trade war. Everyone loses. The real question is, who's going to lose less? Section 6. EU and China. Friends or foes? The future of trade relations. This whole trade war begs the question, what does the future hold for EU-China relations? Will they continue to clash, or will they find common ground? Are they destined to be rivals, locked in a perpetual struggle for economic dominance? Or is there a path to mutual benefit? Or can they find a way to coexist peacefully, cooperating in areas of mutual interest? The stakes are high, and the world is watching. The answer, as always, is complicated. There are no easy solutions in international trade. There's no doubt that the EU and China have very different economic systems and very different views on how the global economy should be run. These differences can lead to friction, but they also need each other. Their economies are intertwined in ways that make complete separation nearly impossible. China needs the EU as a market for its goods, providing a steady stream of revenue for its industries. And the EU needs China as a source of cheap labor and raw materials. This relationship is crucial for many European businesses. Well, it's going to take a lot of dialogue, a lot of compromise, and a willingness to see the bigger picture, and a lot of patience. Both sides will need to navigate these waters carefully. Both sides are going to have to be willing to give a little to get a little. It's a delicate balance. And they're going to have to find a way to manage their differences without resorting to damaging trade wars. The future of global trade may depend on it. From factories to consumers, how this trade war affects you. You might be thinking, this is all well and good, John, but how does this trade war actually affect me? Well, my friend, it affects you in more ways than you might realize. It's not just a distant political issue, it has real, tangible impacts on your daily life. For starters, it's going to make a lot of the stuff you buy more expensive. Everyday items, from groceries to electronics, could see price hikes. Remember those tariffs we talked about? They are essentially taxes on imports. Those get passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. Retailers and manufacturers often have no choice but to increase prices to cover these additional costs. So if you're in the market for a new car, a new phone, or even just a new pair of shoes, you might find yourself paying more than you expected. Be prepared to pay a little extra. These costs add up over time, affecting your overall budget. But it's not just about higher prices. The economic ripple effects can be far-reaching. This trade war could also lead to job losses. Companies facing higher costs might cut back on their workforce. If businesses can't afford to import the goods they need from China, they might have to lay off workers or even shut down operations. They might have to lay off workers, leading to increased unemployment rates. And if Chinese companies can't sell their products in Europe, they might have to close down factories, affecting their economy as well. The interconnected nature of global trade means that a trade war can have widespread consequences, impacting economies and lives around the world. Can anyone stop this? The role of international organizations. So, is there anyone who can stop this trade war before it spirals out of control? Well, that's where international organizations like the WTO come in. The WTO's job is to promote free trade and to resolve trade disputes between countries. But the WTO is only as effective as its members allow it to be. If countries start ignoring WTO rulings, or if they start imposing unilateral tariffs, the whole system starts to break down. So, the WTO can play a role in resolving this trade war, but only if the EU and China are willing to play by the rules. America's role. Will Biden join the fray or watch from the sidelines? And then there's the United States. The US isn't directly involved in this trade war, but they're certainly watching it closely. The US has its own trade disputes with both the EU and China, and they're not afraid to use tariffs as a weapon. So far, the Biden administration has been relatively quiet on the EU-China trade war. They've expressed some concern, but they haven't taken any concrete action. But that could change. If the trade war starts to hurt the US economy, Don't be surprised if Biden steps in and tries to mediate a solution. The future of global trade. What happens next? So, what does the future hold for global trade? It's hard to say for sure, but one thing's for sure. The days of unfettered free trade are probably over. The COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the growing rivalry between the US and China have all made countries more wary of relying too heavily on global supply chains. We're likely to see a shift towards more regional trade blocs and more protectionist policies. But that doesn't mean that global trade is dead. It just means that it's going to be messier, more complicated, and a lot more interesting. So, stay tuned, folks. This is just the beginning.